The Aegean Sea sparkled like scattered diamonds beneath the afternoon sun as Alexander Papadopoulos stood on the terrace of his modest Athens apartment, his weathered hands gripping a leather-bound collection of his own poetry. The Acropolis loomed in the distance, its ancient marble columns catching the golden light, eternal witnesses to countless stories of rise and fall, betrayal and redemption. 10 years, 10 long years, since the world he'd built crumbled around him like the ruins that dotted this ancient city. Alexander's steel-gray hair, now shoulder-length and tied low at his nape, caught the breeze as he opened the poetry book to a page marked with a faded photograph. The image showed two young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing outside a small cafe in Plaka. One was himself at 38, full of trust and dreams. The other was Dimitris, the man who would destroy everything Alexander held dear. His mind drifted back to that autumn day, 10 years ago. The memory unfolds in sepia tones, like an old film reel spinning backward through time. "Alexander, my friend," Dimitris had called out, his voice warm with false sincerity as he approached their usual table at Café Thanasis. The scent of strong Greek coffee and baklava filled the air, mingling with the laughter of tourists exploring the cobblestone streets of Plaka. Alexander had looked up from his manuscript, his eyes bright with the kind of trust that comes from decades of friendship. "Dimitris, I was just working on something new. Listen to this." He had cleared his throat and begun to read. "From ashes we rise like morning light. From darkness we bloom like spring's first flower. The soul that knows true rebirth's might can never be crushed by worldly power." Dimitris had nodded appreciatively, his dark eyes gleaming with what Alexander had mistaken for admiration. "Beautiful, as always. Speaking of rebirth, I have a proposition that could transform both our fortunes." The memory fractures, reality bleeding back in. Now, standing in his sparse apartment, Alexander felt the familiar knot of pain tighten in his chest. That proposition had been the beginning of his downfall. Dimitris had convinced him to invest his family's publishing company as collateral for a revolutionary real estate venture. Within months, forged documents had emerged, painting Alexander as the architect of an elaborate fraud. His reputation was destroyed, his assets frozen, his literary career reduced to ash. But they hadn't known about the secret fund his parents had established years before their death. $12 million hidden in a Swiss account, waiting for the day their son would need it most. Alexander's phone buzzed. A message from Clara, his one remaining ally, an art dealer who'd never believed the lies. "The vultures are gathering at the Riviera Hotel tonight. Dimitris is throwing another party with your stolen money. Are you ready?" His reflection in the window showed a man transformed by suffering, his face gaunt but determined, his blue eyes no longer trusting but burning with quiet purpose. He touched the hidden key around his neck, the key to everything Dimitris thought was lost forever. 10 years have passed, he whispered to his reflection, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated patience. In the distance, he could see the construction cranes around a gleaming hotel complex. The Dimitris Curry's resort, built with blood money and false promises. Soon everyone would know the truth. "They think I've fallen, but I carry my parents' legacy." The Riviera Hotel blazed with golden light against the darkening Athens skyline. Through its floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's elite mingled on marble terraces. their laughter echoing across the illuminated pools while the Aegean whispered against the shoreline below. Alexander adjusted his white linen coat and wide-brimmed hat as he approached the hotel's grand entrance. The transformation was subtle but complete. Instead of the broken poet they remembered, he now carried himself like a man who'd found his center again. Inside the opulent ballroom, Dimitris held court near a massive ice sculpture shaped like the Parthenon. At 46, he'd grown soft around the middle, his designer suit unable to hide the corruption that had fattened him over the years. Beside him stood Elena, his wife, a sharp-featured woman of 43, whose cold beauty matched her reputation for cruelty. To new ventures, Dimitris raised his champagne glass, his voice booming across the room. 10 years ago, I saved this city from a fraud who would have destroyed our real estate market. Tonight, we celebrate the prosperity that came from justice. Alexander felt his jaw clench as applause rippled through the crowd. From his position behind a marble pillar, he activated the small recording device hidden in his watch. Elena's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. Speaking of justice, darling, I heard whispers that Papadopoulos might be back in Athens. We should be cautious of strangers. That broken man, Dimitris laughed, the sound harsh and brittle. He doesn't dare show his face. Besides, what could he possibly do? We have everything. His family's money, his reputation, his future. I will reclaim what belongs to me, Alexander thought, his inner voice steady as carved stone. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, photographing documents left carelessly on tables, recording conversations, gathering the evidence that would unravel their empire thread by thread. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were so confident in their victory that they'd grown careless. Near the hotel's business center, Alexander slipped inside and accessed the computer system. Years of patient planning had given him everything he needed: passwords gathered from former employees, financial records traced through shell companies, the digital breadcrumbs of a decade of theft. His phone vibrated with a message from Clara. "The Swiss account is ready. Are you certain about this?" He typed back, "12 million is just the beginning. They stole my life, but they awakened something stronger." The documents began downloading. Contracts, bank transfers, recorded phone calls where Dimitris bragged about framing that fool poet. Each file was a weapon, each piece of evidence a step toward justice. Through the office window, he could see the party continuing below, Dimitris and Elena basking in their stolen glory, while the Acropolis watched from its eternal perch, patient and knowing. Alexander closed his eyes and recited the mantra that had sustained him through 10 years of exile. "From ashes, we rise like morning light. This evidence will be the key." 3 weeks later, the Athens Business Conference buzzed with excitement as Greece's most powerful investors gathered in the grand ballroom of the Megaron Concert Hall. Alexander sat in the back row, no longer hiding behind disguises or shadows. Today the world would see him as he truly was, not a broken poet, but a man reborn. The moderator's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unexpected addition to today's program. Alexander Papadopoulos, representing the Papadopoulos Foundation, has requested to address the assembly." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Dimitris, seated in the front row with Elena, went pale as marble. His wife's manicured fingers dug into his arm. "That's impossible," Elena hissed. "He has nothing left." Alexander walked to the podium with the measured pace of a man who'd learned to savor each moment. His white linen shirt was pristine, his gray hair gleaming in the spotlight. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who'd stared into the abyss and climbed back out. 10 years ago, his words cut through the silence. I was accused of fraud by someone I trusted like a brother. Today, I present the truth. The massive screen behind him flickered to life, displaying bank records, forged documents, and recorded conversations. Dimitris's voice filled the hall, caught on tape years ago. The fool trusted me completely. His family fortune was easier to steal than taking candy from a child. Gasps echoed through the audience. Dimitris shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage and panic. "This is fabricated. This man is a criminal, a criminal with $12 million in untouched assets." Dimitris's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "The Papadopoulos Foundation has just purchased 60% of your resort chain, Dimitris. I am now your majority shareholder." The room erupted. Elena's composure cracked like a broken mask as she stared at her husband in horror. "You told me he had nothing left. You swore you'd taken everything." "I never told you about the Swiss account," Dimitris whispered, his empire crumbling in real time. I thought it was gone." Alexander activated his phone, and suddenly his image appeared on screens throughout the conference hall. Not as a defendant, but as a live streamer addressing thousands of viewers. He held up his leather-bound poetry book, the same one from that cafe encounter a decade ago. "My name is Alexander Papadopoulos," he said, looking directly into the camera. "For 10 years I've been silent while lies defined my legacy. Today I reclaim my voice." He held up his leather-bound poetry book, the same from that cafe encounter a decade ago. "This collection is called Rebirth. Every poem was written during my exile, every word forged in the fire of betrayal. But fire doesn't destroy, it purifies." The live stream counter showed over 50,000 viewers and climbing. Comments flooded the screen. Support, outrage at the injustice, demands for accountability. Elena launched into damage control, her voice shrill with desperation. "He's mentally unstable. This is all lies and manipulation." But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming, the truth undeniable. Dimitris slumped in his chair as police officers entered the hall, arrest warrants in hand. "You can't destroy me," Dimitris shouted as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I built an empire." Alexander's eyes, once filled with pain, now held the quiet strength of someone who'd learned that patience was the most powerful weapon of all. 10 years was enough time for me to rebuild everything you
thought you destroyed." As the authorities led Dimitris and Elena away, Alexander remained at the podium, watching the Acropolis glow in the distance through the hall's massive windows. The ancient stones had witnessed another story of justice delayed but not denied. "They thought I would stop there, but I have one final step."
6 months later, Alexander stood in the marble corridors of the Athens Superior Court as the judge's gavel fell with the finality of thunder. The verdict echoed through the courtroom. Guilty on all counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Dimitris received 8 years in prison, Elena 5. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded Alexander as he descended the stone steps. His transformation was complete, no longer the broken poet of 10 years ago, but a man who'd learned to turn suffering into strength. "Mr. Papadopoulos," a reporter called out, "what do you say to those who claim this was merely revenge?" Alexander paused, considering the question with the same care he'd once given to crafting verses. Revenge is hot and quick, like wildfire. Justice is patient and thorough, like the sea wearing away stone. I chose the sea. Clara waited for him at the bottom of the steps, her smile radiant with pride. As his trusted art dealer and the one person who'd never doubted his innocence, she'd helped orchestrate the financial maneuvers that brought down the Chorus empire. "I have something for you," Alexander said, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. It was a new poem, written that morning as he'd watched the sun rise over the Aegean. When trust becomes betrayal's seed, when friendship turns to bitter greed, the soul that learns to wait and grow will reap far more than it could sow. Clara's eyes shimmered with tears as she read, "It's beautiful, Alexander. Your parents would be proud." Through the courthouse windows, they could see Dimitris being led away in shackles, his face a mask of defeat and disbelief. Elena walked separately, no longer the cold, calculating woman who'd once sneered at Alexander's name. Prison jumpsuits had a way of stripping away pretense. "Please," Elena had whispered earlier, approaching Alexander during a recess. "We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive?" Alexander had looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman who'd once laughed at his poetry, who'd helped spread the lies that destroyed his reputation. "Time doesn't forgive those who waste it on greed," he'd replied quietly. "But it does teach us what truly matters." Now, standing in the Athens sunlight, with his assets restored and his name cleared, Alexander felt the weight of a decade's worth of patience finally lift from his shoulders. The Papadopoulos Foundation was worth over $20 million. His poetry was being republished worldwide. And most importantly, he'd learned something invaluable about the nature of resilience. His phone buzzed with notifications, interview requests, speaking engagements, publishers wanting to discuss his memoir. But one message caught his attention from an unknown number. "I knew your father. He would be proud. But be careful. Some enemies have long memories." Alexander stared at the cryptic warning, a chill running down his spine despite the warm Mediterranean air. "I thought everything was finished, but the past may not be done with me," 1 year later, the Papadopoulos Poetry Library opened its doors on a sun-drenched corner of Plaka, just 3 blocks from the cafe where Alexander's downfall had begun. The converted 19th century mansion overlooked the Aegean, its reading rooms filled with golden light and the whisper of turning pages. Alexander stood in the main hall, watching as children from Athens' poorest neighborhoods gathered around him for their weekly poetry workshop. Their eyes shone with the same hunger for words that had driven him to write his first verse decades ago. "Who can tell me what rebirth means?" he asked, his voice gentle but strong. A girl of perhaps 12 raised her hand. "When something dies and comes back to life?" "Close," Alexander smiled. "But rebirth isn't about dying and returning. It's about discovering who you were meant to be all along." He opened his leather-bound collection, the same book that had sustained him for 10 years of exile, and began to read. The phoenix doesn't mourn its ashes. The butterfly forgets its cocoon. The soul that embraces transformation sings a more beautiful tune. Through the library's tall windows, the Acropolis stood eternal against the azure sky, its marble columns unchanged by the passage of millennia. Alexander had come to understand that he, like those ancient stones, was part of something larger than individual triumph or tragedy. One of his students, a boy named Nikos, whose family had lost everything in Greece's financial crisis, approached with a crumpled piece of paper. "I found this in an old book. It has your friend's name on it." Alexander's breath caught as he recognized the handwriting. It was a poem by Dimitris, written during their university days, before greed had poisoned his friend's soul. "True wealth is found in faithful hearts, not in the gold we hoard away. The richest man is he who starts each morning blessed by friendship's ray." For a moment, Alexander felt the flicker of the old pain, the memory of betrayal sharp as a blade. But then he looked around at the library, filled with young voices, learning to transform their struggles into art. At Clara, arranging an exhibition of his watercolors in the adjacent gallery. At the life he'd rebuilt from the ashes of trust broken and dreams deferred. "Sometimes," he told Nikos gently, "people forget who they used to be. The saddest thing isn't that they hurt us, it's that they hurt themselves even more." As evening approached and the students reluctantly headed home, Alexander climbed to the library's rooftop garden. The Aegean stretched endlessly before him, its surface painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. Somewhere in a prison cell, Dimitris was probably watching the same sunset through barred windows, contemplating choices that couldn't be unmade. Alexander pulled out his phone and began typing his evening reflection for the blog that had grown into an international phenomenon. 10 years of pain taught me that rebirth is the soul's greatest art. We think we know our limits, our capacity for forgiveness, our strength in the face of betrayal. But life has a way of surprising us. Today, I realized that my greatest revenge wasn't destroying those who hurt me. It was becoming someone they could never touch again." He paused, then added, "The ancient Greeks believed that time was cyclical, that everything returns in different forms. Perhaps they were right. Today, teaching children to find beauty in their struggles, I understand that poetry isn't just words on a page. It's the music we make from the broken pieces of our hearts." The notification showed thousands of likes and comments already pouring in from around the world. Messages of support, stories of similar betrayals overcome, testimonies to the power of patience and perseverance. As evening approached and stars began to appear over Athens, Alexander closed his eyes and felt the Mediterranean breeze carry the scent of jasmine and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students eager to transform pain into art, new opportunities to prove that the human spirit could not be permanently broken. For the first time in over a decade, I am writing my own story again, and it shines as bright as poetry. In the distance, the Acropolis stood illuminated against the night sky, eternal, patient, and beautiful. Like the city itself, like the man who'd learned to rise from ashes, it endured.